They didn't just commit the sin, they celebrated it. They didn't just accept it, they weaponized it.
Let the heavens watch! We have no need for forgiveness here!
But here's what they don't tell you. Someone had to teach them first. Someone had to plant the seed.
Why let an ancient god deny you a pleasure that feels this real?
And when the angels finally arrived in that cursed city, what they saw made even Jibril, the most powerful of Allah's messengers, prepare for destruction unlike anything the world had ever seen. You think you know the story of the people of Lot? You don't. Because buried in the ancient texts is a question that will shake you. Who corrupted them first? How did an entire civilization fall so deep into darkness that they invented a sin that had never existed before? And what role did Iblis play in their descent into madness?
I didn't force them. I only opened the door. They walked through it themselves.
Today, we're uncovering the untold chapter, the one they don't talk about, the origin of the corruption, the first whisper, the moment everything changed. But before we begin, hit that subscribe button and smash the like, because what you're about to hear will change how you see temptation, society, and the battle for your soul. And when we're done, send this to someone who needs to hear it. Now, send peace and blessings upon the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and let's begin. Picture this, a land so fertile that crops grew without effort, rivers flowing with crystal clear water, markets bursting with trade from every corner of the world. The cities of Sodom weren't cursed from the beginning, they were blessed. Allah had given them everything, wealth that made neighboring towns jealous, beauty that made travelers stop and stare. These weren't monsters from birth, they were people, normal people, families, merchants, farmers. They married, had children, worshipped in their own way. For generations, they lived like everyone else. But here's what's terrifying. Evil doesn't announce itself with horns and fire. It comes disguised. It comes gradual. It comes through a door you left unlocked. The historical accounts tell us something bone-chilling. There was a time, a specific moment in their timeline when this sin didn't exist. Not just in Sodom, but anywhere on earth. The Quran makes this clear. You commit a fahisha that no one in all the worlds has preceded you in. Think about that. In the entire history of humanity up to that point, across every civilization, every tribe, every nation, this particular transgression had never been conceived. The fitra, the natural disposition Allah created in mankind, had kept every soul from even imagining it. So, what changed? Who broke the seal? The scholars of tafsir and the historians of old point to something deeply unsettling. A stranger came to their land. Some say he was a traveler from distant territories where Iblis had already been whispering for years. Others suggest he was one of their own, a man of influence, charisma, someone people listened to. But whoever he was, he carried with him an idea, a philosophy, a justification that sounded almost reasonable. Why should we be bound by these old restrictions? He would say in private gatherings. Look at how prosperous we are. Look at how blessed. Clearly, we're doing something right. Maybe it's time we explored what truly brings us pleasure. After all, if we're not harming anyone, why should the heavens care what we do behind closed doors? You see, Iblis is a master strategist. He doesn't start with the sin itself. He starts with the questioning of boundaries. He plants doubt about divine wisdom. He makes you believe that your desires are more enlightened than ancient guidance. And in a society drowning in material blessings, where comfort had made them spiritually lazy, these words found fertile ground. The first instance, whatever form it took, was likely done in absolute secrecy, hidden, shameful even to the one who did it. But shame is a protection, and when shame is mocked, when it's called backward or old-fashioned, that's when the door swings wide open. Within a generation, what was hidden became whispered about. What was whispered became discussed. What was discussed became accepted. and what was accepted became celebrated. They didn't wake up one morning and decide to become the most corrupt people on earth. It happened slowly, choice by choice, justification by justification, until the day came when a young prophet named Lot would arrive in their streets and find a civilization that had completely inverted the natural order of creation. But by then, the stranger's work was done. The seed had grown into a tree of poison, and its roots had spread too deep to pull out. Listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you reveals exactly how Shaitan operates, not just then, but right now, in your time, in your society, in your own mind. Iblis didn't send armies to Sodom. He didn't cause famine or drought. He didn't need to. Why destroy their bodies when he could corrupt their souls? Why take away their blessings when he could make them use those very blessings as justification for rebellion? This is genius-level manipulation, and it's been his signature move since the Garden of Eden. The attack began with a single concept: freedom. Not the freedom that Islam teaches, the freedom to submit to your Creator and liberate yourself from slavery to desires. No, this was different. This was the freedom to do whatever you want, whenever you want, with whoever you want, as long as it doesn't hurt anyone. Sound familiar? It should. Because that same lie is being sold in every generation, repackaged with different words, but carrying the same poison. Iblis whispered to the influential ones first, the thinkers, the poets, the wealthy elite who had time to philosophize while others worked. You're enlightened, he told them. You're not like those simple-minded people clinging to old traditions. You understand that life is about experiencing pleasure, exploring your authentic self, living your truth. Every sentence dripped with pride, disguised as wisdom. And pride, that original sin that got Iblis himself cursed, is the gateway drug to every other corruption. Here's where it gets diabolical. He didn't tell them to abandon belief in the Creator altogether. That would have been too obvious, too shocking. Instead, he repositioned Allah in their minds. Of course God exists, they'd say, but God is loving, merciful, understanding. He wouldn't want us to be miserable. He created these desires in us, didn't he? So surely he expects us to fulfill them. To deny them would be to deny his creation. Do you see the trap? They use divine attributes to justify divine disobedience. They quoted mercy to escape justice. They twisted blessing into permission. And then came the language shift, because controlling language is controlling thought. What was once called perversion became preference. What was deviation became diversity. What was forbidden became freedom of choice. Iblis knows that if you can change what people call something, you can change how they feel about it. Make the haram sound harmless, and half the battle is won. But he didn't stop there. The masterstroke was turning victims into villains. Anyone who dared speak against this new enlightenment was labeled oppressive, backward, hateful. Lot would later experience this firsthand, a prophet of God being called the problem, while the people destroying themselves were called progressive. Iblis flipped morality upside down and convinced them that up was down, that wrong was right, that the person warning them of fire was the enemy, not the flames. And the most haunting part? They genuinely believed they were happy. They thought their packed clubs and public indulgence were signs of liberation. They measured success by how much they could do without consequence, not realizing that the consequences were building inside them, in their hearts, in their society, in their sealed fate like pressure in a volcano that would eventually erupt. The destruction wasn't coming despite their pleasure, it was coming because of what they called pleasure. Iblis didn't need to destroy them, he just needed to convince them to destroy themselves. And they did it willingly, smiling all the way down. The scholars disagree on his name, but they agree on one thing. He existed, one man, one single human being who shattered a boundary that had stood since Adam walked the earth. The first to commit the act that would define an entire civilization's downfall. And what's chilling isn't just what he did, it's how quickly he went from trembling in secret to teaching others to do the same. Some historical accounts suggest he was a man of status, wealthy, influential, the kind of person others looked up to, whose opinions mattered at social gatherings. He wasn't an outcast or a madman ranting in the streets. He was respectable, integrated, trusted. Which is exactly why what happened next spread like wildfire instead of being contained like the aberration it was. That the person warning them of fire was the enemy, not the flames. The first time, they say, his hands shook, his heart raced. Every fiber of the fitra, that natural, pure disposition Allah placed in every human soul, screamed at him to stop. The angels recording his deeds hesitated, perhaps hoping he'd turn back. His own conscience waged war inside his chest. Because here's the thing about the fitra. You can bury it, ignore it, drown it out with justifications, but you can never fully kill it. It will always whisper the truth, even when you've spent years training yourself not to listen. But he did it anyway, and the moment it was over, something shifted. Not in reality, in his perception of reality. The sky didn't fall. Lightning didn't strike him down. Life continued. The market still buzzed with activity the next morning. His wealth didn't vanish. His status remained. And that's when the most dangerous thought entered his mind. Maybe it's not as wrong as I thought. This is Iblis's second phase attack. The first phase plants the idea. The second phase provides the false evidence. Look, nothing bad happened. You're fine. You're still you. Perhaps the old restrictions were just exaggerated. The absence of immediate punishment becomes, in the sinner's mind, proof of permission. They confuse Allah's patience with Allah's approval. They mistake the delayed consequences for no consequences. Within weeks, he told a close friend, framed it carefully, philosophically. I've discovered something about human nature. He might have said, we've been limiting ourselves based on fear, not reason. The friend was shocked at first, until he wasn't. Curiosity is a powerful thing. Just once, the friend thought, to see what he's talking about. And just like that, one became two. Two became four. Four became a circle. The circle became a movement, and the movement became a culture. But here's what happened in that transition. Shame transformed into pride. The second generation didn't hide it like the first man did. Why would they? By then, there were enough people doing it that they could create their own moral framework, their own community standards. They went from, we shouldn't speak of this, to, why should we be ashamed, to, actually, we're brave for being so open about who we are. The first man broke the seal. But his children broke something far worse. They broke the idea that it should ever have been sealed at all. They didn't just commit the sin, they celebrated it, normalized it, and eventually, as Lot would discover, they punished anyone who refused to celebrate it with them. One man's weakness became a nation's identity, and it took less than 30 years. There's a pattern to how societies collapse, and the people of Sodom followed it with terrifying precision. What started in locked rooms under cover of darkness would eventually happen in broad daylight in the town square. And the speed of this descent, it should shake you to your core. Generation 1 hid it. They knew it was wrong, felt the weight of it, carried the guilt like chains. They'd meet in secret locations, speak in codes, live double lives. There was still enough fitra left in them to feel shame. And shame, even in sinners, is a mercy, because where there's shame, there's still hope for return. Generation 2 whispered about it. They didn't practice it publicly yet, but they talked about it more openly among themselves. They formed what we'd call today communities of affirmation. Places where they could discuss their inclinations without judgment, where they'd reassure each other that what they felt was natural, maybe even special. The secrecy remained, but the guilt began to fade. They started using different language, not sin, but orientation, not deviation, but identity. Words matter. Change the vocabulary, and you change how people think about the reality. Generation 3 normalized it. This is where the collapse accelerated. They didn't just practice it privately, they demanded that others accept it. If you spoke against it, you were the problem. You were judgmental, oppressive, hateful. They flipped the script entirely. The person calling out wickedness became wicked, and the people engaged in wickedness became victims needing protection. Does this sound familiar? It should, because this playbook is ancient, and Iblis hasn't needed to update it because it still works. But Generation 4 celebrated it. They held festivals. They marked certain gatherings where this behavior was the main event. They created clubs, actual physical spaces dedicated to it. The Quran mentions this directly. And you approach men in your meetings, not hidden anymore, not even just accepted, celebrated, publicized, turned into entertainment. They had descended so far that what once made their ancestors tremble in secret now made them dance in public. And then came the final, most demonic stage, weaponization. They didn't just want to practice their sin, they wanted to force it on others. Travelers passing through their land weren't safe. Merchants who came to trade weren't safe. Any stranger, any outsider, any young man who had the misfortune of entering their territory became prey. They'd assault them, humiliate them, violate them, and send them away traumatized if they let them leave at all. This wasn't about desire anymore. This was about power, domination, corruption for the sake of corruption. They cut off the roads, caravans stopped coming, trade routes shifted to avoid their cities entirely. And instead of seeing this as a sign that something was deeply wrong, they became angry. Who are these outsiders to judge us? Who are they to avoid our land? Zero self-reflection. Zero accountability. Just rage that the world wouldn't validate their choices. From one man's secret transgression to an entire civilization's public identity in less than a century. From hidden shame to weaponized pride in 3 generations. This is how evil becomes normal, gradually, then suddenly. One compromise at a time, one redefinition at a time, one celebration at a time, until the society that once knew right from wrong can no longer tell the difference. Until prophets are mocked and predators are protected, until up is down and down is up. And that's exactly where they were when a young man named Lot arrived at their gates, carrying a message they had no intention of hearing. Years had passed since Lot began his mission, years of warnings, preaching, pleading, years of mockery in return. And during all those years, Allah was watching, measuring, giving them chance after chance to turn back. But there comes a moment, and only Allah knows when the testing period ends and the judgment begins. For the people of Sodom, that moment arrived on an ordinary afternoon when 3 strangers appeared at the city gates. They weren't ordinary strangers. They were Jibril, Mikael, and Israfil, 3 of the mightiest angels in existence, warriors of the heavens who had witnessed the creation of worlds. But on that day, they walked the earth in human form, and not just any human form. Allah commanded them to appear as young men of such striking beauty that anyone who saw them would stop in their tracks. Flawless faces, radiant presence, the kind of appearance that would test the deepest desires of a corrupted heart. Why? Why did Allah design the test this way? Because judgment must be based on clear evidence. These people had been warned by Lot for years, but they could always claim, "We're not as bad as he says. We have some self-control. We wouldn't harm the innocent. Words are cheap." Allah wanted to see their actions when temptation stood right in front of them, when the test wasn't theoretical but flesh and blood walking through their streets. The angels entered the city in the afternoon. Lot's daughter saw them first, and her heart dropped. She'd lived among these people long enough to know exactly what would happen if they laid eyes on these strangers. She ran to her father, breathless, terrified. "There are men at the gates, and Father, I've never seen anyone like them. If our people see them..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Lot knew. He rushed out immediately, his mind racing. He had to get to them first. He had to hide them before anyone else noticed. But it was already too late. Eyes were watching from windows. Whispers had already begun spreading through the alleyways. Did you see them? Where did they come from? Who invited them? The network of corruption moved fast. Within the hour, the entire city knew strangers were in town, beautiful strangers, and they were staying at Lot's house. What Lot didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that Jibreel and his companions had specific instructions from Allah. They were not to destroy the city until they witnessed with their own eyes the depth of the people's corruption. They needed to see whether any shred of humanity remained, whether any fear of consequences existed, whether the warnings of a prophet for all these years had penetrated even a single heart. And so they waited, silent, observing. As Lot paced nervously, trying to subtly convince them to leave before nightfall, the angels sat calmly. They watched Lot's desperation. They saw his genuine fear for their safety. They witnessed a prophet who cared more about protecting strangers than his own reputation. But they also saw what was building outside. They heard the footsteps gathering, the voices rising, the crowd assembling. As the sun set, the test reached its climax. A knock on the door, then pounding, then the voices, dozens, maybe hundreds, demanding that Lot hand over his guests. Not asking, demanding, threatening, shameless, aggressive, entitled. They didn't care that these were travelers under a host's protection, a sacred code in every culture. They didn't care that Lot was begging them to fear Allah. They didn't care about anything except satisfying their desires, right now, by any means necessary. And in that moment, Jibreel knew. The test was over. These people hadn't just failed, they'd revealed something worse than Allah's angels had seen in generations. They had no boundaries left. No red lines, no humanity. They'd crossed the point of no return. The sun had set completely. Darkness wrapped around Lot's house like a shroud, but the street outside was anything but quiet. Torches flickered, shadows moved. And the voices, Allah help us, the voices grew louder with every passing minute. What started as a few dozen had swollen into a mob. Men from every corner of the city, abandoning their evening meals, their families, their dignity, all converging on one location with one sick, unified purpose. They wanted the guests, and they weren't leaving without them. Inside, Lot stood with his back against the door, his heart hammering so hard he could hear it in his ears. His two daughters huddled in the corner, terrified, watching their father face an impossible situation. Behind him, the three strangers sat with an eerie calmness that didn't match the chaos outside. Lot kept glancing back at them, confused by their composure. Didn't they understand what was about to happen? Didn't they hear the madness gathering? The pounding intensified, fists against wood, then shoulders, then something heavier. They were trying to break it down. Lot, open this door. The voice belonged to one of the city elders, a man Lot had known for years, a man who once showed him respect. Now he stood outside screaming like an animal. You know what we want. Send them out. You've hidden travelers from us before, but not tonight. Send them out or we're coming in. Lot's mind raced through every possible solution. Fight? He was one man against hundreds. Run? They'd surrounded the house. Reason with them? He'd been trying to reason with these people for decades. But he had to try. He had to. Because that's what prophets do. They stand in the gap between divine wrath and human wickedness, hoping against hope that even one soul might turn back. He opened the door, just a crack, enough to speak but not enough for them to force their way in. The sight that met his eyes would haunt him forever. A sea of faces, twisted with lust and rage, holding torches that cast demonic shadows across their features. These were his neighbors, people he'd lived among, bought from, sold to. And now they stared at him like predators who'd cornered their prey. My people, Lot's voice cracked, but he forced himself to continue. My people fear Allah. These are my guests. They're under my protection. What you're asking, it's madness, it's evil, The crowd erupted in mocking laughter. Someone shouted, "We don't care about your God or your protection, Lot. We want what we want." And then Lot said something desperate, something that reveals just how far gone they were. "Listen to me. I have daughters, unmarried daughters, pure, honorable women, if you must. If you need." He could barely get the words out, the offer tasting like poison on his tongue. "They are lawful for you. Marry them. Approach this the right way. Just leave these men alone." The silence that followed was worse than the shouting. Then came the laughter, cruel, mocking, dismissive laughter that said everything about how inverted their nature had become. "Your daughters." Someone yelled, "Lot, you know we have no interest in women. You know what we want. Stop wasting our time." Another voice cut through. "You've been lecturing us for years about morality, and now you want to make deals? You're pathetic." The crowd surged forward. But here's the betrayal that broke whatever hope remained. From inside the house, Lot's own wife moved toward the back entrance. While her husband stood defending strangers at the front door, she slipped out the back and ran straight to the mob's leaders. "They're definitely inside," she whispered. "3 of them, young, just like the rumors said." She'd been doing this for years, reporting Lot's guests, sabotaging his warnings, playing both sides. But tonight, her betrayal would cost her everything. Lot stood alone, one prophet against an entire civilization, and the door was beginning to crack. The door was seconds from breaking. The mob pressed forward like a single beast, their voices blending into one roar of depravity. Lot turned back to his guests one final time, desperation written across his face. "I wish I had the strength to fight them all," he whispered. "I wish I had an army, a fortress, anything to protect you from." "Ya Lot." The voice that interrupted him didn't come from a frightened traveler. It came from something far greater. One of the guests stood, and as he did, the very air in the room seemed to shift. "We are not who you think we are." In that instant, Lot understood. These weren't men, they were messengers, angels. And the one speaking was Jibril himself, the angel who had delivered revelation to prophets, who had shattered armies, who stood in the direct presence of Allah. "Your people will not reach you tonight," Jibril continued, his voice carrying a weight that made the walls seem fragile. "You've delivered the message. You've stood firm. You've done your part. Now it's time for us to do ours. Take your family," Jibril commanded. "Leave this city before dawn. Don't look back, no matter what you hear. Walk until you reach safety. And your wife, she will not leave with you. Her heart has been with them all along, and she will face what they face." Outside, the mob had stopped pounding. An eerie silence fell. Then someone screamed a scream of pure terror, then another, then chaos. Lot peered through a crack in the door and froze. The men who had been clawing at his entrance moments ago were now stumbling backward, hands clutching at their faces, colliding into each other, falling over themselves in panic. They were blind, every single one of them. Jibril had swept his wing once, and their eyes, those eyes that looked upon haram with pleasure, that gazed at wickedness without shame, were gone, not just closed. Erased, sockets smooth as if eyes had never existed, and yet they still raged. Even in their blindness, even feeling the first touch of divine punishment, they screamed threats. "Tomorrow, Lot, tomorrow we'll find you. We'll make you pay for this sorcery." Tomorrow. They actually believed there would be a tomorrow. Lot gathered his daughters and fled into the night. Behind them, the city descended into chaos, blind men stumbling through streets, crashing into walls, calling out for help that wouldn't come. But Jibril wasn't finished. As Lot's family reached the outskirts, putting distance between themselves and the doomed cities, the real destruction began. Jibril descended into the earth itself. His wings so vast they could shade entire nations spread beneath the 7 cities of Sodom, beneath the foundations, beneath the bedrock, and then he lifted. The ground tore apart with a sound like the earth screaming. Buildings that had stood for generations cracked like eggshells, trees ripped from their roots. The entire civilization, homes, markets, temples, streets, everything rose into the air on the back of an angel's wing. Higher, higher. The scholars say he lifted them so high that the angels in the lowest heaven could hear the barking of their dogs, the bleating of their livestock, the confused screams of people who couldn't understand why the sky was beneath them and the earth above. Can you imagine? An entire society, suspended between heaven and earth, held up only by the wing of the angel they'd spent years ignoring the warnings about. And then Jibril flipped them. One motion. The cities that once stood proud, that once bustled with trade and wealth and arrogance, were turned completely upside down. What was up became down. What was foundation became sky. And they fell. Thousands of tons of earth and stone and human bodies plummeting back toward the ground in a free fall that must have felt like eternity. The impact shattered the earth. The crash could be heard for miles. But that wasn't the end. As the dust began to settle, as the last echoes of destruction faded, the sky darkened again. Not with clouds, with stones. Stones of baked clay, each one marked, each one carrying a name. The Quran says they were musawama, marked, designated. Every stone knew its target. Fire rained from heaven, and each piece found the person it was meant for, the man who first broke the fitra, the elder who led the mob, the woman who betrayed her prophet husband. Stone after stone, name after name, until not a single soul remained. Lot walked through the night, his daughters beside him, refusing to look back, despite the sounds, the terrible, final sounds of a civilization being erased. But his wife couldn't resist. Whether from concern for her people or disbelief at what was happening, she turned. She looked back at the moment Allah had commanded her not to. And a stone fell from the sky, marked with her name, ending her life in the same moment it ended theirs. By sunrise, where 7 thriving cities had stood, there was only silence, cracked earth, smoking ruins, and water, bitter, lifeless water beginning to pool in the crater that remained, the Dead Sea. Still there today, still dead, still a sign. The land so cursed by what happened there, that nothing grows, nothing lives, nothing flourishes. A permanent testament to what happens when a society crosses every line, ignores every warning, and forces the hand of divine justice. The destruction of Sodom wasn't just punishment. It was a message, written in geography, preserved in history, echoing through time. Some sins don't just destroy individuals. They destroy everything. Lot and his daughters kept walking. Behind them, the sounds of destruction faded into an unnatural silence. When dawn broke, they turned just once to see where the thriving cities had been. Nothing. Just cracked earth and smoke rising from what would become a Dead Sea. A permanent scar on the landscape, a warning carved into the very geography of the earth. But here's what should terrify you. This story wasn't preserved in the Quran just as history, it was preserved as prophecy. As a mirror, as a warning that what happened once will happen again, in different lands, in different languages, but following the exact same pattern. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings upon him, made this crystal clear. He said, "Whoever you find doing the act of the people of Lot, execute the one who does it, and the one to whom it is done." Not a suggestion, a command. But why such severity? Why such urgency in his voice when he spoke of this? Because he knew that this specific sin doesn't stay individual, it becomes societal. It doesn't remain private, it demands public affirmation. It doesn't just destroy the person, it dismantles the family structure, attacks the fitra, and unravels the moral fabric that holds civilizations together. And then he said something that should make every believer's blood run cold. I do not fear anything for my ummah except the deed of the people of Lot. Not poverty, not tyranny, not foreign invasion, the deed of the people of Lot. Because he understood that when this sin takes root in a society, it signals that something fundamental has broken. The society has stopped recognizing divine boundaries. It has elevated personal desire above divine decree. And once that happens, once I want becomes more sacred than Allah said, every other sin becomes permissible. Look around you. Watch how it unfolds today, in real time, following the exact script. Stage 1. It's hidden. It's shameful. Practitioners feel guilt. Stage 2. We're born this way. We can't help it. Stop judging us. Stage 3. Accept us or you're a bigot. Normalize it in your schools, your media, your laws. Stage 4. Celebrate it. Put it in your children's cartoons. Wave flags about it. Make it an identity more sacred than religion. Stage 5. Punish anyone who disagrees. Fire them, ban them, criminalize their speech. The acceleration is breathtaking. What took Sodom 3 generations now takes 3 years. The same arguments, the same language, the same demand that society not just tolerate, but participate in validating what Allah has forbidden. And anyone who dares say this contradicts our values is treated exactly like Lot was mocked, threatened, silenced, driven out. But here's what the people pushing this agenda don't understand. Allah's law doesn't change based on human votes. The boundaries he set aren't up for referendum. And the consequences he promised aren't suspended because a society decides it's evolved past divine guidance. The Dead Sea is still there, still dead, still a sign for those who have eyes to see. Does this mean destruction is coming? Only Allah knows the timing. But the warning is clear. Nations that follow the path of Sodom are walking toward the same cliff, just with better marketing and prettier flags. They think they're progressing. They think they're enlightened. They think they've moved beyond ancient restrictions. But they're not moving forward. They're circling back to the same rebellion that's been tried before. The same one that ended with cities flipped upside down and erased from existence. The story of Lot isn't ancient history, it's current events. And the question isn't whether the pattern will repeat, it's whether anyone will heed the warning before the ground starts to shake.